I'm assuming you're talking about RBCS's ISTQB e-learning courses. Please send an email to info@rbcs-us.com and let us know what the problem is. If maybe you're having a problem with registering or having a problem with your account, but let us know and we'll get that fixed immediately. Because yes, all the ISTQB Foundation and Advanced courses are up there and they're operable, so we can solve this problem. Shakira asks, is there a way to get a copy of the presentation? Shakira, I assume you joined late because I mentioned this at the beginning. It is at www.rbcs-us.com on the basic library page. So feel free, as I said, to download it. If you like it, share the link to other people, please. Question from Jay Miller. When will your book, Beautiful Testing, be available? Well, just to clarify, it's not my book. It's a book, I contributed to this book. It's being published by O'Reilly. It's got a number of chapters from a number of various people involved in testing. I believe it will be out in early fall, as I understand it. I would go out to the O'Reilly website, which I'm afraid I don't know the URL off the top of my head, and take a look there and see if it's listed for coming. But it should be a good book. There's a lot of interesting contributors there. Any recommendations for books/papers on how to measure metrics and what to measure? That's from Albert. Good question. So obviously I've got some discussion about success criteria for testing in my book, critical testing processes, and in addition in my other book, Advanced Software Testing Volume 2, the one about test management, it talks about metrics for success of a test team and what to measure. Now in general, there are three types of things that you're going to want to look at as a test professional from a metrics point of view. There's the product metrics. Now this is quality in use, as the phrase goes. This is looking at customer satisfaction and field failure rates and those kind of things of, what was the ultimate quality delivered from a customer's perspective. There are project metrics, which are basically looking at how close are we to done in terms of release for this project? Bug find, fix curves, and test completion percentage and that kind of good stuff. And then there's also process metrics, and that's actually what I was focused on here, is adopting a set of metrics for your process, your test process, and things like defect detection effectiveness. What percentage of the defects do you find? Defect detection efficiency, which can be measured through your cost of quality. What is the cost of finding a defect in test compared to the cost of finding a defect in the field? In other words, how much money do you offer the organization the opportunity to save every time you find a bug? That basically what you want to do for your process metrics is define your goals, objectives of your organization, and then define for those the ways in which you would know whether you were meeting those goals or not, the key questions that you would need to be able to answer to know whether you were meeting those goals. And then from that, the metrics that would measure them would follow. And ideally for, let's say you use the critical testing process framework, you'd have 12 processes. For each process, you'd have, say, 3 or 4 key process indicators that you would be looking at. So that's the way to proceed on that. Let's see, question from Shane. One thing that test teams sometimes deal with is bad requirements documents from designers. You have garbage in, garbage out. What's the best way to prevent this? Should you just keep sending the docs back? And sometimes both sides get frustrated with. Yeah, that requirements ping pong is definitely not a fulfilling experience. I mean, we had that happen with one client once where we were going back and forth, back and forth. Finally, the client contact came to us and said, look, you got to stop pestering these guys with your marketing people with your questions about the requirements. And I said, well, we've done some analysis on this, and then we can proceed with the requirements the way they're written, but we expect that we're going to be about about 20 to 25% less efficient if we have to proceed with this document. So that basically there's me pointing out the pain, right? That's basically saying either we're going to test 20% less, 25% less, or we're going to cost 20 to 25% more, right? Now, the client came back with an interesting response. He said, I would rather just pay you the extra money now than have to try to teach these guys how to write requirements. And I said, well, that being the case, I mean, as long as your checks don't bounce, that's fine. And I think you have to be realistic about how much change you're going to be able to affect here. I mean, quantify the problems that this bad requirements cause in terms of a reduced defect detection effectiveness, a reduced defect detection efficiency, increased turnaround time in terms of closure period on the bugs, because there's arguments about whether something is or is not a bug, the increased defect rejection rate, which is another form of inefficiency, and start to quantify some of the things that happen because of bad requirements. And if that doesn't motivate change, then you just have to play the hand you're dealt. I mean, as testers, we have to do that. But make sure that when you're trying to motivate change, you're not communicating from a, it makes me sad when these things happen perspective, because that don't communicate about your pain, because as I've said many times, nobody cares about your pain, right? In an organization, people care about wider organizational pain. So anytime you're talking about how sad it makes you that something happens, there's a place to have that conversation, and that place is called a bar, and that's called venting, but the problem solving is a different thing. Let's see. Albert asks, how can we communicate to senior management that quality is important from the beginning of the development process? Well, I think this gets into what does management value, right? If money is important, then one of the things that you can do is look at the differential cost of failure later in the project rather than earlier in the project, and communicate based on that. If time to market is what's really important, then communicate about how it is that a large number of bugs found during system test is what actually determines how long system test takes to execute, right? I mean, do a simple comparison of what if we ran every one of our tests and they all passed and we didn't find any bugs? How long would it take us to release then versus what we currently experience? This gets back to finding people's pain. What is going to motivate them to change is what makes them feel pain. And I would say go after that. Figure out what is their motivation, what is their pain point, and use that to try to motivate. Now, I want to be clear. You can do this the wrong way and come across as manipulative, and I'm certainly not. I'm not trying to suggest that. I'm suggesting an honest attempt to communicate with people about something that matters to everybody when I'm talking about pain. I'm not talking about manipulating people politically. Let's see, another question via email. I've read about test policy documents in your book on advanced software testing. Can I use a test policy document to define my mission, and if so, how does that work? Yes, you absolutely can. There's a discussion about that in Advanced Software Testing Volume 2 about how a test policy document works. It should be a short document that defines your objectives and key metrics for using those objectives. And I would say that's a good thing to do. Look at defining a process and or defining your mission and your objectives in that policy document. A question from Yusuf here. Good to hear from you again, Yusuf. What's your advice on managing stakeholder expectations? How do you convince non-technical people who strongly believe you should find all bugs that it can't be done? Ooh, well,